Welcome to Lunchtime Topics. I'm Kate with the Creative Coast. The Creative Coast is a 501c3 nonprofit in Savannah, Georgia, and we exist to catalyze the innovation economy here on the coast of Georgia. We offer educational and social programming to help area innovators start, accelerate, and grow their businesses. And Lunchtime Topics is one of our educational programs. So twice a month, we bring on a business expert who shares their insights and expertise with the local community of entrepreneurs and innovators. And for today's Lunchtime Topic, we are talking about credit card processing costs and that come from credit card processing companies and how they affect a business's bottom line. So a few weeks ago, Andy Gasly, he's a local business owner here in Savannah. He popped into our office and he was sharing about the work he's doing with weaudit.com. Weaudit.com, it's an auditing and interchange management firm that's run by CPAs, former bank executives, and attorneys with the goal of reducing credit card processing costs for all merchants. So Andy was basically explaining to me that a lot of businesses don't realize that the credit card processing doesn't have a ton of regulation around it, and there are a lot of unnecessary costs that can be audited and save companies thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the size of the company. So today, Robert Day, he's the founder and managing partner of weaudit.com. He's joining us to talk about what's going on in this complex world of credit card processing, in terms of what's being charged and how companies can actually audit these costs so they can keep their credit card processors, but don't lose the money as every transaction adds up and so forth. So as I mentioned, Andy introduced me to WeAudit and is the business development manager at weaudit.com. He's on with us today. And so Robert, Andy is super passionate about this subject, as he was shocked himself as an entrepreneur when he realized how much these credit card processing costs added up. Again, thousands to millions of dollars. So today he's introduced me to Robert, who's going to be sharing his presentation with us. Robert has been described as the passion behind weaudit.com as the founder and managing partner. Under Robert's leadership, WeAudit has grown from a small startup in 2009 to the current industry leader in merchant processing auditing. And there's really nobody that does what weaudit.com does. We'll get into that in a little bit. Robert has over 35 years of experience in the financial industry, and 20 of those were in the merchant processing industry. He brings an abundance of knowledge from working on the inside and behind the scenes of the closed door industry. We're super lucky to have him here today. He's very well respected in this industry. To name a few, he's been quoted by the Wall Street Journal, CNN Money, the Washington Business Journal, Yahoo Finance, and Business Week. Robert has appeared on Fox, ABC, NBC, and CBS affiliates, and shared the stage with Steve Forbes at the 2014 New York Financial Summit. So in 2007, Robert was awarded the President's Award from Fifth Third Processing Solutions. And in 2013, he was named the STL Entrepreneur of the Year semifinalist. And in 2019, weaudit.com was awarded the BBB Torch Award for exceptional ethics and service. So quite the resume, very impressive. Robert and Andy, thank you for being here today. I'll give you the mic to share with listeners and viewers. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. I hate hearing that whole long introduction. I just say, yeah, I'm qualified, leave it at that. So, anyway, so let's jump in and kind of go through some things here. And hopefully I think everybody will get some nice takeaways and some eye openers, things that you're going to want to go back and look at your statements. Most people don't realize just how much money is being taken out of your bank account directly from your processor without your knowledge. I often refer to this industry as stealing your profits. My wife always corrects me on that and says, hey, stealing is a harsh word, but stealing is taking without one's consent or knowledge. So when I go through here and I show you some of these fees, if you weren't aware that that was happening to you, and you didn't consent to it, well, then you have to shoot fits, I guess, call it what it is, and that would be stealing. And so we want to show you exactly how the banks and processors do it. So without wasting too much time talking about that, let's go ahead and show you kind of some examples. This is kind of a nice slide, though, when we think about merchant fees, because it really helps you resonate with really what's going on, right? Like, in other words, a huge chunk of your profits are just being sucked down the drain and you have no idea. The other thing that's unique about merchant processing, unlike any other industry, is really whenever you get a bill from anybody, whether it be a utility company, from one of your vendors, et cetera, you get a bill, you look at the bill, you validate the bill, and then you pay the bill. Not in merchant processing, you don't. They just take the money right out of your bank account. Why? Well, that's the first trick right there, right? Because when you look at your merchant processing bill, the natural thing is you're like, what's data one? What's IRF? What's standard? What's a discount rate? What's a interchange settlement fee? What is all this? And so you have a tendency that you'd want to go back and say to some rep, I got a lot of questions. To avoid those questions, to avoid answering a bunch of worthless information, because it is all worthless, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, they avoid that by just taking the money right out of your bank account. Now, imagine, though, if we could visualize that, though, for what it truly is. Imagine back in the day when banks or businesses rather did their banking in such a way that they held their money right in their own office in their safe. And imagine if your vendor came by with a big old duffel bag and just literally started stuffing cash in it. And you're walking in after lunch and they're dragging a bag out the door with $50,000 cash, right? You'd be like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. What are you doing? Why are you doing? You say I owe this, prove it to me, show me. Right? But when they start pointing to things like data one and IRF and interchange clearing fees, you're going to go, what's that? And they're not going to have answers, right? And why not? Because a lot of it's made up, and we're going to talk about that, right? So first thing, though, before we even get into that, is really just kind of talking about how does this even work? What are all these fees and who's getting paid what and why? So this is kind of a pie chart. As you can see, interchange fees make up the largest component of fees, typically for most businesses. If you're in the B2B, that really jumps up considerably. If you're in a direct-to-consumer, not nearly as much, but still it makes up the biggest percent no matter what. So the interchange fees there again, and is going to take the biggest chunk. So, and then we're going to talk about dues and assessments, the processing networks, and what they're getting. There again, the discount rate, which goes to the processor, what that really constitute. There again, interchange should be managed, right? And then hidden fees. We're going to talk a lot today about hidden fees. Why is that? Well, because that's the underlying easy money, right? Dues and assessments, there's really nothing you can do other than validating their bill correctly. Discount rate you can negotiate, but it should make up the smallest percent. So really, why would you be focusing on the smallest percent when you should be focusing on the largest percent, right? So that's interchange, making sure there again, that's clearing the way that it should, right? So those are the areas we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about what's going on in the interchange as of late, right? And that is Visa and Mastercard promised to delay their fees, but the reality is, even though they did, after Congress asked them to hold them off, they still introduced a lot of the fees anyway. So, and now they're getting ready to even make more. They're hiding more fees than ever, right? And how are they doing that? Well, they're taking and removing common sense definitions, right? So like if you said card not present, you would understand what that means, right? But they're not using that. Then they're consolidating more categories. And trust me, consolidation is not what you want. You want itemization, not consolidation. In other words, if you went to the grocery store, would you want your bill just to say produce, $500? No, you want to know exactly what you bought in produce, how much, what the ounces were, the item description, what you paid. So when they consolidate your bill for making it simple, that's their way of being able to bundle things and making it actually harder to find where they're doing it, right? Less information equates to less knowledge, which equates to the fact that you can't dispute, right? The other thing that's going on in this environment, right, is Mastercard's changing over 65 cards types as of late. Mastercard small ticket jumped 30 basis points. So if you're in a really like small restaurant or something, that's really going to wreak havoc on you. There again, consumer cards went from 5 to 55. Now, granted, 55 is high, but most of those were closer to the 5 than the 55. Discover changed 33 categories. They're again bumping up their dues and assessments as well. And there again, so going from 13 to 14. Visa changed over 250 categories, right? Most have a price increase, right? Here's one though, like I was saying on the earlier line, that they're again, changing common sense things from card not present to product one. I mean, why would you call something product one? If I tell you a card wasn't present and that's why I surcharged you, I think you would know. Don't get me started on that, because there's no reason why they should even charge you a higher fee because a card's not present. There shouldn't be any fluctuation in interchange at all. In 1991, there was only two categories: card present, card not present. Today, collectively, when all categories with all industries are calculated in, there's over 1,000, right? So how do we go from 2 to over 1,000? Touch on that in just a second as well. So why do they even change interchange every April and October? I mean, let me ask you. I mean, you started this product 1991, and since that time, you keep constantly reinventing it. How many of you guys have a company that every April and every October, you kind of just recreate yourself, right? You say, you know what? Let's scrap the way we've been doing things and let's just start over, right? Every April, every October. That's because that allows then for processors to call you up, and processors will call you up and say, hey, did you hear about the new rate increase, blah, blah, blah. Now's the time to move because we can protect you from that. They can't protect you from interchange. So that just hang up. I mean, you know, you're dealing with a con man at that point. So just make it a quick phone call, put them out of their mercy and just hang up, right? Tell them you're out of business, whatever, but don't waste your breath with even trying to argue with them. Because people like that have a knack for keeping you on the phone for 10 minutes while you're trying to get off, right? Then the other thing is it's a smoke screen. It's just to hide fees. So there again, let's say with April right now, processors right now will actually have implemented new fees. Why? Because now whenever your fees go up 200, 300, 400, maybe 1,000, even several thousand, depending on the size of your company, then when you call up your processor, you're like, hey, I noticed my fees went up $2,000 a year. They're going to say, oh, here's why. And they're going to send you a link to an article. They're going to send you to something that says Visa and Mastercard has massive rate increase, right? And they're going to go, that's why. And you're going to go, oh, okay. But rates go up and down. I mean, if you think about it, every April, every October, if rates just did nothing but go like this, every April and October, the actual discount rate would be about 20%, right? Because back in 1991, they were almost 2%. And some of the categories are less than 2% today. So the reality is, depending on the business type and the card type, you're paying less today than you were in 1991. Well, before they started adding all the other fees. But the actual interchange, which is what we're talking about, right, actually has gone down in many categories, not just up. So it's a constant like this. It's really not designed to be like this, straight north. It is lower, raise, and then put headlines out. Hey, because here's the thing, Visa and Mastercard can take the hit. They can be the bad guy. Why is that? Why can they be the bad guy? Because nobody ever signs up. You don't sign up with Visa and Mastercard. Your processor who's in cahoots with Visa and Mastercard, they'll blame Visa and Mastercard for their behavior. So it's good cop, bad cop, basically is in a nutshell what they're kind of doing there, right? So they're taking the hit, telling you that Visa and Mastercard's doing it to them, while they're in the back room actually coming up with new hidden fees. So we'll kind of talk about some of those as well, right? So speaking of the oversight is, Catlin mentioned a second ago. So at the end of the day, there's really no oversight. They investigated this industry and they came back after a long investigation, said they're again, small businesses, large business like, they're overbilled without restraint. That sounds like a very kind of lame, not really, what does that mean? Well, without restraint doesn't mean that they're just overbilling you. It means there's no cap on how much they're overbilling you. In other words, if you're a small business, they just go for it. A big business, they got to be a little cautious because maybe you've hired a company like ours to protect them. But for the small business who thinks they can't afford to have a company do something like we do, which again, we do this for mom and pops all the way to Fortune 500, everything in between. We kind of protect you from those type of things of being overbilled, but the processors themselves have no oversight. So in other words, we see businesses who think they're paying 2%, when we actually disclose all the hidden fees, they're actually paying 7% or more, right? In other words, there's no cap. The government doesn't say, here's how high you can go, right? And everything else, there's what's called state usury laws, which means you can't go over a certain amount on a credit card, for instance. You can't go over on a personal loan. You can't, there's limits. Merchant processing, there is no limits. Senator went on to say it's a price fixing scheme, period. So I don't think he really speaks highly of the industry, or even says they're even remotely good guys. But nevertheless, no matter how much negative they speak against them, they don't stop them. And that's what's important to remember. So basically, banking is in two categories. There's what's considered the regulated side. That's student loans, home loans, car loans, whatever, right? So no one ever calls you up on your car loan and says, hey, guess what? We just took your 60-month loan and made it 72. We took your 3% loan and made it 6.5%. We didn't do any of those things, right? But nevertheless, on the regulated side, they are constantly being audited for unethical billing, right? To the tune that the top 10 banks pay out an average of $24 billion a year. It's not last year, it was last year, the year before, the year before, the year before, and so on, right? So in other words, they keep this same behavior. Why? Because if you can make 100 billion, right, and then only get penalized for 24 billion, well, who's not going to keep that up, right? You only change behavior when you get $24 billion fine for trying to take $4 billion in unethical billing. So even on the regulated side, the government's clearly not doing a good enough job to protect businesses or consumers, because the banks are still going after it hard and heavy every year, right? Then on the non-regulated side, this is where merchant processing falls in, right? And for legal disclaimer, the attorneys always say you can't say non-regulated, right? Because there may be some minute little thing that the government considers to be regulated. Yeah, okay. A lot of people think about debit cards being regulated because they even say these are regulated debit cards and non-regulated debit cards. What does regulated mean, though, in that sense? That means the card issuer has to charge the processor a smaller fee for a regulated debit card. So in other words, the bank, the issuing bank, let's give this example. Let's just use Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, doesn't matter. They will then lower their fee to the processor side. So in other words, Bank of America charges Bank of America processor a lower fee for that debit card. Does the law then require Bank of America to pass that saving on as a processor to the actual merchant? No. Okay, so back up and repeat that again, just because it's not so much what this does is tells you the craziness. In other words, the bizarreness, the are you kidding me? So one division of the bank has to lower the fees to the other division of the bank, but that division which you interact with, which is the processor, does not have to pass those savings on to you as a business. So they were regulated to play fair inside of their own institution, right? They don't actually have to play fair when it comes to the actual merchant. It'd be like me having to lower my internal cost to another department in my company, but then I don't have to actually do anything when it comes to consumers. But then I get to say the government's regulating us, right? So yeah, okay. So anyway, on that note, we estimate that with what we see, that there's roughly $100 billion in overbillings taking place each year. How are they doing it? Let's get into that. So first and foremost to realize is this is called enhanced billing. Now, it's not as popular anymore as we see kind of times changing, and that's to be expected. Why? Because every time we see something, have a webinar, blog, write on it, teach on it, they just rename it, reserve it up. I had an aunt that way years ago when I was a kid. If I went to her house for the weekend, she made fried eggs. I hated fried eggs, but I got to learn fried eggs tasted better when they first are fried than a day and a half later. I'll just tell you that right now. So I've learned, okay, that, eat it when it's served up. Otherwise, you just keep getting the same thing reserved up over and over. Well, the processors, thank God, what they do, or I guess maybe that is, or maybe not the right thing to say, because they don't keep reserving it up. They rename it and then they reserve it up, right? And they put a little different flair on it. So we're going to show you kind of how different things work, but ultimately we're getting to the same fried eggs, right? We can call them fried breakfast. We can call them fried yellow things. We can say yellow things with white trim, or we can just say a white yolky thing. We'll rename it, right? But you're still going to get the same fried eggs reserved back up, okay? So the other thing to remember is in the naming, they always want you to want it, right? So in other words, if I say to you, hey, do you want enhanced billing? You're thinking, well, yeah. When I go to McDonald's, I know nobody here goes to McDonald's, but they say, hey, do you want the supersize? You're like, for free? I can have the supersize for free? Yeah, man. Give me the big Diet Coke. Give me the fries. Yeah, hit me, baby. So they use verbiage, right, that will always go against our natural grain. So for instance, an interchange is an example. They'll use words like standard. Standard makes you think, well, that's normal, that's average, right? But it means the worst, right? They'll use level 3 for which is a good interchange category, right? And they'll use level 1 for a bad interchange category. But when we want customer service, we don't say, hey, put me in the third tier, the level 3 customer service. When you're frustrated, they'll go, well, let me escalate this up to our level 1 team, right? But in processing, you want to be elevated to the level 3, right? Not elevated to level 1, right? So everything is backwards. So just sort of think, when a processor says this is good for you, this is bad. When you hear a term being used that sounds like it's a good idea, it's not a good idea, right? So always just know that, going with your eyes open. Let's get into exactly how this game is played. So there's this thing called EIRF, EIRF. What does it mean? Electronic Interchange Reimbursement Fee. Now, I know everybody knows now not to do that, right? So if you see EIRF on your statement, that's not a good thing, so avoid it. Now, when I ask this class live in a group, I'll say, how many people in the room know what EIRF is? Not a hand goes up. I'm like, seriously? No one here knows what Electronic Interchange Reimbursement Fee means? Shockingly, no one knows. I'm like, I'll give you $500 if anybody knows, right? Google it, right? You got your phones, Google it. Can you find it? No. Okay. So they don't want you to know. Now they could say something like missing zip code, which is what it means for most businesses. And there again, that's where it gets a little tricky, because the type of business you are, they change the meaning of it. So even if you can find the meaning in some blog somewhere, chances are it doesn't fit your business, right? Because depending on your business, it could mean something else, right? It's extremely nebulous. When you call your processor, they just say, it means you did something wrong. Yeah, gee, genius. I didn't have to wait an hour on the phone to hear that, right? But that's all they'll give you, right? When they should say on your statement, missing zip code, or maybe for your industry, maybe it means you put in the zip code, but you just put in the wrong zip code, or maybe you put in the zip code in the wrong format, right? So in other words, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong here. And all they could do is just tell you, hey, you put this in this way, or you didn't put it in, but they don't want to tell you that. Why? This way they can charge you more. They'll say you're your partner, but at the end of the day, after they take you golfing and maybe take you out to a nice lunch, they do things like this. So clearly they're not your partner. Now, here's where it gets worse, right? So they charge you this, and I won't get it too deep into the woods here, because EIRF should never even exist in the first place, because they say that exists because they're, again, it's a high-risk transaction for the processor because you didn't put in the right zip code. Not true. You, the merchant, eats the loss, not Visa, not Mastercard, and not your processor. You, the merchant, eats it. So they're charging you something they shouldn't in the first place. But here's where it gets worse. So Visa would charge this merchant 76 basis points, right? And so the way we do that, of course, is kind of showing you how we get into the math, right? And we can back into this and see that they're charging 1.41 collectively when they should be charging you 76. Where did the extra 65 come in? That's called enhanced billing. So when you signed up for your processing agreement, some sales rep who wanted to go to Cabo and be in the President's Club this year checked a little box and says, hey, bless this merchant with a little bit of enhanced billing. That means every time you get something wrong, we're going to smack you even harder. So if you didn't already get a worthless penalty put on to you, we're going to give you a double worthless penalty. So anyway, as you can tell, I'm not fond of that. So here's another case where this company, this processor, settled $72 million for allegedly, right? And of course, I don't know about you guys, but I would never pay anybody $52 million for allegedly doing anything. I'd only pay a $52 million lawsuit if I was afraid it was going to go to court and I was going to be stuck paying way more once the truth came out. But so they're not guilty of anything. I want to be clear. They were never found guilty of this. Just people thought they were doing it. And then they said, oh, you think we're overinflating your interchange? Oh, well, because you think that, here's $52 million to not think that anymore. Okay. So yeah, I mean, make what you will out of this, but at the end of the day, what they're doing is padding interchange. What is padding interchange? Overinflating interchange. So if an interchange category, it's a lot like enhanced billing, right? What they're doing now is it's no longer enhanced billing. Now it's inflating interchange or padding interchange. So again, we have eggs with a new name, right? They're taking something that should have cleared at 2% and they're clearing it at 2.5, making it look like Visa charged you 2.5 when in fact it was them who made you pay 2.5. So they're just tacking on extra fees to the actual interchange fees. So here's a real statement. This company is paying 1.43 and for their discount rate. They're calling it processing fees, but yeah, their discount rate. And I'm going to talk more about why you don't want to see a discount rate that is bundled like this one, but we'll talk more about that in another slide. Then they're paying there again 9 cents per transaction. And of course, they're paying here again for an authorization fee, kind of nickel and diming them a little bit, a network processing, our network processor access fee. And then again, down here, we have actually a risk fee being assessed, right? So then we kind of blocked out the bundle, the guilty down here, their name there. So just kind of pointing that out. But with all the overall costs, this merchant thinks they're paying 1.43 plus a transaction fee and an auth fee. Well, you shouldn't have a transaction fee. You shouldn't have an auth fee, but then you shouldn't have a batch settlement fee, right? You shouldn't have a dial transaction surcharge or a monthly statement fee. And you certainly shouldn't be paying for any type of risk fee, right? That is completely made up, or the network processor access fee. These are all junk fees, right? So now the person who says, well, I'm paying 1.43 plus a transaction fee, you're paying 5.2%, right? They just all these added in junk fees, which again, the vast majority of these are not real. You don't owe them. There's no such thing as a transaction risk fee, right? There is such a thing that is assessed by the actual networks, but these are not the same thing that we're talking about. These are processor risk fees. Now they'll say it's a transaction risk fee AX, which means American Express, but it's not going to American Express. It's going back to your processor, okay? So there again, just junk fees that are overinflating everything. And there again, we kind of put some stars here because it's network processor access fee and these risk fees are kind of the newest to the family. So these are something they're doing as of late that we see a lot of. Made up fees. So here we have network acquired fee. If you notice, I talked earlier about assessments, right? So you see Discover assessments, Mastercard assessments, MC assessments for over 1,000, which means Mastercard transactions over 1,000, the famous made up fee, network acquired fee, and then Visa assessment fee. Why is there not Visa or Mastercard, American Express, or Discover in front of the network acquired fee? Is it in an assessment? Right? No, it's not an assessment, but they're putting it in with the assessments, right? But they're not actually going so far as to say it's Amex or Visa or whatever. They're just saying, hey, just kind of bump this extra line in here real quick, and we're just going to get an extra 5 basis points on every transaction, right? So that way we can just make more money, right? There's not a real thing. Then when you Google it, you're going to Google this and you're going to have something that probably comes up saying Visa fixed network acquirer fee, right? So you'll assume that's it. But remember now, network acquirer and Visa, right? So it's fixed Visa network acquirer fee, not network acquired fee, right? You're also going to notice that it shows on Google when you look it up that it is a dollar amount, because Visa does have a real fee named that. But this is not it. Again, they're just making you pretend that Visa is doing this. And their fee is not a fixed dollar amount like Visa's is. This is actually a percentage amount. Again, showing it's not the same fee. They just simply name it, right? Very similar, right? It's I kind of liken it to when I see the Maserati. It's real hard to read the Maserati emblem, you know? And so if somebody wanted to knock them off, it'd be like a Maserati, right? You know, this is kind of the Maserati. You're paying for something that's not real, it's not legit, and it's going to pure profit. Made up fees again. So here we have again the Discover assessments debit, Mastercard assessments, Visa assessments, right? And then we have this thing called the settlement funding fee. And with the assessments, there's no such thing as settlement funding fee. Okay, it's just, again, another made up fee, right? Bottom line is that I'm going to get out of those kind of made up fees, but suffice to say, don't write all these down and look and see if you have one. Because again, they just rename them, right? The minute you catch on and you go, hey, I just went to a webinar and there's no such thing as a settlement fee. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we could take that off. Yeah, yeah, normally we charge that, but because that's for this really complicated thing that we can't explain. But we'll wipe it out for you. And stay tuned, we'll add a replacement in 60 to 90 days when you're not looking, right? We'll just raise this assessment fee, right? So we'll just keep reserving it up under a different brand, different name. Here's they're being a little more creative. In order to pad the interchange, remember we talked about that? So if we look at this statement, here's a statement where it says MC Merit 1, 1.89% and 10 cents a transaction. It's the exact same statement only a few months later. MC Merit 1. Wait, where's the 1.89? Why did they get rid of the 1.89? Well, because if I want to jump this rate from 1.89 to 2.5, you would probably look at your statements and go, hey, this rate went from 1.89 to 2.5%. Like, are you kidding me? That's a pretty hefty rate increase. Can you show me where Mastercard changed that, right? No, I can't. So to avoid all of that, they simply just remove the rate. Now, when they change it to be 2.5%, you don't even notice. And aren't you a happier merchant because of it? And that we've actually heard them tell us. They've actually said, we remove these rates because it causes confusion and stress for our clients and merchants. So by their request, we've simplified things by removing too much information. I'm like, are you currently high right now? I mean, does it sound as bad to you speaking it as it does to me hearing it? Like, that's a little little like that's a pretty big stretch. I mean, you guys should have reread that back in the conference room a few times before you really decided to go with that as your company policy of reasoning, right? So here we'll talk about there again, that regulated, non-regulated debit we talked about earlier. So it doesn't mean they're going to pass those savings on to you. So here's an example. Visa sales discount, there again, it's bundled 1.89%. We'll talk more about bundling in a second. There again, and then when it comes to the debit, they actually reduced it to 1.46. Okay, great. So I'm getting that lower fee passed back on to me, right? They're lowering the debit fees, okay? But in this particular case, it wasn't a regulated debit card. It was just a regular debit card, right? So they gave me 28 basis points off because that debit card costs less, right? However, the networks, in other words, their fees on this particular card were 59 basis points left. So what happens to the other 31 basis points? Well, I don't know if you've ever driven by like the ocean front, you've seen big fancy yachts and stuff like that. You always go, who can afford a yacht like that, right? Well, that'd be credit card processors. Look up their salaries for their top CEOs. You'd be amazed at how many yachts they can afford. Actually, several a year, right? They could buy one and put it in Cabo, one and put it in, down in Florida, put another one in California, just one in, somewhere in Europe. I mean, you can do a lot of yacht shopping when you're making, right at $30 million a year for how many years, right? It's hard for them to convince me that they're playing fair when your top C-suite's making collectively over $100 million for their salaries alone. Clarify, not their salaries, total compensation, right? Because they don't get that in a salary. They only get that because the company made so much money, right? While they're trying to tell you that they're there for you, right? And for what it's worth, I was on the other side of the aisle for years, right? So, I jumped over to this side of the aisle right at almost 15 years ago. So, in all fairness, I know how it works. I was there. I did it. I was executive for one of the largest processors in the world. So I guess at some point you get sick of it. So thank God for that. But anyway, so here we're keeping the rebates, right? So when there's refunds, right, meaning you ran $100 sale, but for whatever reason, that $100 sale now gets undone, right? So in that scenario, there again, the banks that actually the card was run on, so let's say Chase, somebody used a Chase credit card, Chase would issue that interchange back to you. So there again, the bulk of the sale, remember, is the interchange, right? You're not going to get back the processor's fees, right? And the dues and assessments, but you are going to get back the bulk of the money, which is the interchange, okay? But if the processor thinks you don't know that money is due back to you, they just pocket it. Now, some people might be willing to give a pass on this and think, well, okay. But what if this happened in any other world, right? What if this year you guys went to H&R Block, got your taxes done, and you had $1,000 coming back in taxes, and so the guy says, hey, thanks for coming in. Good news is I was able to work this pretty good for you. You don't owe a dime. Yeah, you're break even this year, right? And he just fills out a form, has you sign it, and it sends the $1,000 to his house. Wow, right? That would be all over 60 Minutes, 2020. People would be going to jail, class action lawsuits. I mean, wow, it would rip through the news cycle like crazy. But guess what happens when processors do that? And you call the media and you say, hey, this just happened to these merchants, right? And it's costing merchants collectively millions and millions and millions of dollars a year. Okay. Yeah, thanks for calling, right? They don't care. They don't care. If I steal $1,000, if H&R Block took $1,000 from one client, it would make all news cycles, right? All across the board. 1,000 to one guy. Do this, 100,000 to 100,000 merchants, silence. That's the crazy part, right? Here we go. I said I was done with made up fees, but I guess we couldn't help but serve up one more favorite. Here they show this is falling in with the Amex fees. So you see the first line there, Amex, B2C wholesale, blah, blah. I don't care about that. Amex sales discount, 15 basis points. That's the second line. Your discount rate should be way less, anywhere from 2 to 5 basis points, right? And you should see your discount rate in such a way. In other words, remember when I showed you that one at 1.43? That's because they're bundling it with other things. Do you want anything bundled? No. You want everything unbundled, clear, transparent. Now, these guys come off like the good guys because, well, they're showing their discount rate. They're the heroes in transparency. 3 times what you should be paying, but at least they're transparent, right? But then the interchange clearing fee hidden in with the Amex fees. Again, it's not a real fee. And it's 35 basis points, right? So not only is a poor merchant getting hit for 3 times what they should be paying or more, right? For a high discount rate, they're hitting them for 35 basis points for just a tack on afterthought, completely made up fee. Merchants will always chase the discount rate. When you call a processor, the first thing you say is, what's your discount rate? I want the lowest discount rate. What's your discount rate? What's your discount rate? That is a false way to shop because they just give you the low discount rate and they make it up in other areas. And then when you call them on your fees look higher, they try to blame it on everybody but them and point back to our discount rate's only this. See right here? This is all we're charging you. No, you're charging me these other things as well. If you have this, some of you that might be on here, if you're early in the journey of merchant processing, you may have what they call bucket billing, where it's mid-qualified, non-qualified, qualified. Only thing I'm going to say on this is change processors. I'm not going to get into the woods of how horrible this is because most of you, it doesn't apply to, but suffice to say, it's the worst processing method that there is. You have the worst deal of anybody. So switch to anyone. You can only stay at the bottom, but you might get lucky and go up. But at the end of the day, not what you want to have. So again, the bundle billing there, again, the discount rate is an example of focusing right there on the discount rate and it being bundled. It should be itemized where you can see it. It should be considerably lower. In 2019, discount rates were averaging 7 basis points or less when we put them out for bid. And then in 2020, we saw that drop to 5 basis points or less. In 2021, it's now down to 2 cents a transaction or 2 basis points for many large accounts. Now, if you're a small account, and chances are you are, if you're on here, we cater to a lot of large Fortune 500, right? But even a small merchant never should be paying more than 7. That's, I mean, in other words, you just went into business yesterday, you got an average ticket of $1, right? And you're selling hot dogs on the street and you're processing $100 this month, right? You shouldn't be paying more than 7 basis points, okay? I mean, you're the smallest of the smallest, the weakest of the weakest. You should not be paying more than that. Missing volume, right? So here we can see what the card type was, this World Card, Mastercard 7. We can see exactly what kind of card that is, and we can see the fee taken for it. What we can't do is validate that fee. Why? Because the way we validate fees is we then take and look at the fee type, what it should be for this card, right? And then we take and basically divide this back into the volume. Once we do that, it gives us a percentage rate. We can match the percentage rate against the World Card Mastercard 7, right? But by removing the volume, right, now we can't do that math. So now we have no idea what the percentage rate of $43 equates to. So let me make it a simpler way to understand that. Assume for a second that you process $43 and somebody charged you $43 in fees. What would that be? That'd be 100%, right? In other words, they charged you pound for pound, right? If you process $86 and they took 43, it'd be 50%, right? But then we could go back and say, hey, is a WorldCard, Mastercard supposed to be 50%? No, it's supposed to be, the low twos, right? So how did we get to 50? Well, to avoid that confusion, we just simply strip out the processing value. And then again, now nobody asks any questions that we don't want to answer. A processor's got two goals: charge as much money as they can and figure out how to keep you from spotting it and asking about it. And it's amazing how they can do it just by eliminating things, not even adding things, just eliminating things, right? Because when you add something, you go, hey, I've never seen that before, right? But when you remove something, you kind of just don't miss it, right? This just gives you what your statement should look like. The key areas: it's got to have the processing volume, the processing fees, the interchange category. There again, we divide the volume in the rate. So, and then we can validate the fees if your statement looks like this. And it doesn't have to look exactly like this. It just has to have this data. It can be in many different places. It can be organized in many different ways. But know this: if it is not in this clear and concise of a method, chances are they're overbilling you. That's why they're moving it all around. They're making it tougher to validate those fees, right? So the more places they put it, the more pages you have to look to try to piece the puzzle together, the more likely you are going to just be frustrated and give up and just pay the bill. Who's your processor, right? So a lot of people don't understand even who their processor is. Everybody always says, well, I'm dealing with the world's largest processor. Well, you probably are, right? But you're not dealing directly with them. And not that that's a bad thing either. There's what's called ISOs, independent sales organizations. And that's what most people are going to be dealing with, right? Like if you buy a Samsung TV, most people don't go up to Samsung's warehouse and say, here, let me come in and shop for a TV. No, goes to a distributor, then to a retailer and so on, right? This industry is really no different, but it's a lot of deception about who they are, right? That's where I get bothered by it. Don't pretend to be somebody you're not, own who you are, and at least then we can deal with some type of integrity. Hey, we're a reseller for Wells Fargo. Hey, we're a reseller for Bank of America or Chase or whomever, right? And so that they just at least come clean with who they are. But here it even gets more complicated because like you look at this company and they say they're Heartland Payments. Heartland Payments is a global payments company, right? And then Global Payments says that they're an ISO on their website. They say they're an ISO for Wells Fargo, which Heartland also is an ISO for Wells Fargo, right? And then of course they say they're also one for Bancorp Bank out of Philadelphia, right? So they got a couple of things here going, right? And then Wells Fargo, this is where it gets confusing too, because Wells Fargo is not actually a processor. Wells Fargo is the sponsoring bank for a company processor called Fiserv. So actually, Heartland is saying that they're an ISO really for Fiserv, and they're also owned by Global Payments, who's another ISO for Fiserv. And again, Fiserv used to be probably a name that is more recognizable for most of you as First Data. So First Data is a processor that got acquired by Fiserv, and they're again, the sponsoring bank is Wells Fargo. What's a sponsoring bank? Well, because merchant processing is a banking product, for lack of better words, processors just can't be in this business. They have to have a sponsoring bank that represents them. So they just get an extra layer of basically kickback, if you will, that there again just drives the cost up more because the banks make it like, hey, we're not going to do this. We'll let all these other guys do this. But all those guys have to pay us a percentage of everything they make so that we'll allow them to be in business and do this. Very complicated. And again, it doesn't have to be, right? In 1991, 2 interchange categories. Now we're talking 1,000. Why? They want to make it complicated. So here's some things to avoid as we kind of are getting close to the end. I just had a long call with somebody today that they're really frustrated with this. The bank is holding their money. right? And that's because they went over their processing limit. Most companies like this client didn't know what their processing limit is, right? You should always know your processing limit. Why? Well, let's say your processing limit and you're a small company is just $100, right? Well, if you run a ticket for $150, you went over your limit. What do? Then they take that, they delay funding it, they put it over into a queue, they let it sit there for a few days, and then they release it back into the queue, but then they downgrade it because they call it delayed settlement, right? They delayed settle it because they said, well, it was over your limit and we thought maybe it was bogus and all this. So, we wanted to look at it for a few days, magically just a little over 3 days, so they could get you for delayed settlement and then push it back to you. Well, so what happens? Well, not only did you lose your money for a while, but maybe that transaction would have cleared at 2.25, all of a sudden it's now clearing it over 3%, right? Because it downgraded because it was delayed. So know your processing limit and make sure that if you're not in that range, that you ask for a limit increase, right? If they refuse to give you that limit increase, there again, you need to be looking for a new processor. But again, I'd be very cautious even in pursuit of that to make sure you're not jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Are you set up with the correct MCC code? A lot of small businesses especially don't know this. Most large businesses, quite honestly, don't know this. An MCC code is how Visa and Mastercard, American Express, and Discover see you. You may say, I'm a florist. I'm a retail florist, right? But Visa and Mastercard does not read you as a retail florist, right? They read you as an MCC code that says that you're a retail florist, right? So every business type, so let's say a retail florist would have one MCC code, wholesale florist would yet have another, right? And maybe you're into selling plumbing parts, you still have one that's totally different, right? And so on, right? So with the wrong MCC code, there's different interchange rules based on your MC code. So the easiest way to describe that is like turning in a math test to a history teacher. What's going to happen? You're going to get an F. In this industry, you don't get an F, you get downgraded. So all of a sudden, all your transactions are being forced into a downgrade scenario because you're set up with the wrong MCC code. So you want to take charge of that. Google your own MCC code, then ask your processor, what MCC code do you show me being? Okay. My wife is notorious. We have 5 kids and never did she ever stop doing it. Anytime they were ever late, she'd say, why were you late? Did this or this happen? I'm like, stop loading their lips. Let them answer. Okay. Same goes here. Don't say, is my MCC code blank? Right? No, because they'll just go, yeah. Right. And you don't know that it is. They just gave you a quick answer without even validating it. You want them to send you the answer. So that way, you know that they know what your MCC code is and they've set you up correctly. Are you set up with the right interchange flag? Interchange flag is really a much simpler, but somewhat complicated. It's really just the type of industry, as in how do you do business, in the sense, are you card present, card net present, e-commerce, that kind of thing, right? Now, in some companies, you may have multiple ways that you accept payments. If you do with any mass size, meaning if you're a card not present, but every now and then you get a little retail business, or you're a retailer and every now and then you get a little non-retail business, right? Somebody pays over the phone, but it's so small and it's insignificant. That's fine. Then you're going to go with whatever you're doing the bulk in. But let's say you're doing $1 million in retail, and then you're doing $1 million in card not present over the phone, keying in transactions manually kind of scenario. You want to have your business broken into 2 interchange flags with 2 type of merchant accounts, right? Same provider, but you want to make sure that you have 2 accounts where your interchange flags are separating those, so that you're not being downgraded because you're doing too much business one way or the other. In other words, you're going to maximize both, okay? There again, you're going to want to make sure you're using the correct payment technology, right? So if you're using B2B, which is all mostly corporate cards and business cards, you're getting a lot of that business. And when I say a lot, it's not the number of transactions, right? It is the volume. So you might do 100 transactions that equate to $10,000. But then you do one transaction a month that equates to $100,000, right? Or 200,000. Right? Then your volume is what you care about. The volume. That's because that's what interchange fees go on, not how many tickets you run, right? You can run a lot of little tickets and that's not a big deal. But when you start processing the volume, that's where the impact changes, right? So you want to make sure that you have the correct gateway, right? That is running through, you're running all your transactions through. So the questions they hope you'll never ask: do you have interchange management program? They're going to say yes. Tell me when a previous downgrades. What's my discount rate? Should be 2 to 7. There again, are you marking it up? You want to ask them this. When's the last time my statement was reviewed? Who received the report? All your answers must be in writing. So you don't want to email these things. It's okay to start the process there, even with your average, like your credit limit. It's fine to email them that, but then say, would you please have an officer put that on letterhead and mail it to us? Why? Because Susie, who just is going back and forth with you on the emails, she can just all of a sudden disappear. She doesn't work there anymore. She made a mistake in what she told you. She didn't mean to, but officers on letterhead are held financially accountable, which means if you lose a lot of money because they gave you the wrong information, you now have grounds for damages, right? Where if you just had Susie or Billy give you the wrong information, they're going to just go, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. So I'm going to blow through this one. You guys go back and look because the screen will tell you what it is, but it's basically somebody who thought they should have got an audit, or they did do an audit and then they didn't do anything about it. And 2 years later, they came back and found out how much more they were getting overbilled. And because I know we're really running out of time here. So I know we got a few minutes late start. So I should have probably made up and adjusted for that a little earlier. I blew past that. Well, I'm not going to be able to go back to that, but there's actually a slide at the very end about, and you can just go out to our website. It's weaudit.com/fine. And you can actually go out and take a little mini quiz where we actually give you a real statement with real examples of how they were overbilling, but you try to find them. And then the quiz kind of shows you where you missed them. So you can kind of play with that. The other main thing I want to let you know, go out to our website. A lot of what we do is free, especially for small companies. You can ask questions. You can talk to people, chat with people. Nobody's going to force you to do anything, right? So we're there as a service to really try to give you guys good education without ever receiving anything in compensation. So make sure you take advantage of that free audit, the whole 9 yards. You can do that as well and really, well, find out exactly where you're at. So anyway, sorry I went a little long there. Let me flip it back to you guys.
That's okay. That was very insightful, and it's incredible how complex it is. That just blew my mind. I mean, so I don't know, we're at 1 o'clock here, so it also depends on how much time you have, Robert.
I've got a few minutes, so.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, let's get to this, because I know you have, you shared where we can go find more information and about the free audit. Thank you. But can you talk about, you have a book coming out. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's supposed to be out, if it stays on schedule, probably towards the end of the year. It's called The Great American Heist, Merchant Fees Exposed. Merchant Fees Exposed is kind of a working title. They're still going back and forth. But in a nutshell, I mean, it's really a lot of what we're talking about in today's class or this, but I kind of just give some more examples of that and kind of try to be a little more storytelling. And a lot of the chapters are kind of named in a funny way with different examples and analogies. Like one of the chapters is green beans. Like you would think, like, if I'm talking about merchant fees, where does green beans fit in, right? But I give kind of analogies in there to where it helps you think, like, what if green beans were part of the merchant processing world? Like, what would that look like? And it would be crazy how the green bean industry would be so different, right? Or how if processors got to do check authorizations, right? Like we kind of talk about that. And so we give a lot of real examples, real stories. And so, and as you can tell by how I talk, even though I'm a managing partner, I have a ton of sarcasm. I do put that as a disclaimer in there and say, if you don't like sarcasm, don't read the book, have somebody else read it for you and kind of maybe give you the notes. But I try to use a lot of wit, a lot of humor, a lot of sarcasm to kind of make it a lighthearted read so that it's not just blah, blah, blah about interchange. So, but anyway, so yeah, so if nothing else, I say it will be a great nightstand book. So if you're having a hard time sleeping, you can always pick that up and read it. Should put you right to sleep pretty fast.
Well, I got to ask, because this stuff is so complex. How long does it take you or somebody to learn the ins and outs of this, whether it's somebody that works at your company or to identify this stuff? I mean, what's been that process?
Yeah, so we have already auditing systems, as you might imagine, but those have to be reprogrammed every April, every October. Thank you, Visa, Mastercard. And that's one of our largest expenses. But then we also eyeball them as well. So after the system is done, then we eyeball them, right? And go through and have to look. Why? Because they're always adding something new. So you can't teach a computer to find something that didn't exist, right? So, you know, if we can ever get to that point, that'd be great. But we haven't figured that out yet. But so, yeah, the learning curve for our auditors is 2 years. So for the first 6 months, they can't do any audits on their own. And then after that, their audits are reviewed by a senior auditor for 2 more years. So, because it is beyond complex.
But it's also good to know that level of training's going into it, because I imagine, I mean, with everything changing as much as you said, it's got to be somebody who's on top of it, and it's like almost living, breathing, eating, whatever you want to call it, the ins and outs of the complex world that you're in. So that's wild. We have another question. Mark has a question. He said, how does We Audit charge for your professional services, flat fee or percentage of funds?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Mark. That's one of my passions, that question alone. So we don't take a percentage, and people, I've even had big clients go, well, I thought that would motivate you to work harder. So we, unlike the guys who take 50% of your savings, I would also challenge, if you probably know of these companies, which is why you asked the question, go and look at their experience. Most of them have zero experience. So what they do is they negotiate a discount rate. Yeah, whoopee-doo, right? So then they want 50% of that. So we actually, the reason we don't take 50% is we don't feel like it's fair to overbill somebody based on the fact that we worked on something for 3 hours, right? Like our largest accounts save like $5, $6, $7 million a year. We work on their account maybe 10, 15 hours a month. We're not going to charge them, right? Like $3 million a year to work on their account, right? So we do it on a flat rate based on time. On top of that, we say, if you don't like what we've done, we'll give you all your money back. So we don't even make you pay us. You only pay us if you love what we do. So that's another thing. So, and if you go out to our website, our flat fees, unless you're up over 5 million a year, excluding Amex even. So because Amex is a different bird. So Visa, Mastercard, and Discover, if you're 5 million or less, our fees are right on our website and they're very transparent. You just go right down the scale. This is where I fit. These are my fees.
Great. Okay. Well, we are past time a little bit here. We're at 1:07, so I'm going to go ahead and close out. If you missed any of this presentation, again, it's going to be posted to our website probably sometime next week. We try to put it in every weekly newsletter, which goes out on Monday. However, the next newsletter will go out on Tuesday, given Monday's a Memorial Day holiday. But I just really wanted to thank Robert and Andy for being here and sharing and educating us on this. I think it's important, and people don't even realize, companies don't even realize it's going on. And when you're running a business or starting a business, this is probably the last thing that's on your mind. You're just trying to get off the ground or keep things running and sustainable. So it's good to know that there's weaudit.com out there doing this for companies, so you don't have to think about another thing, especially something as crazy and like I've said 10 million times complex as this. So
yeah,
wow.
most people think of this as like their water bill. It's just something they got to pay, but it's not. I mean, it is easily reduced for some companies up to 40 to 50%.
Crazy. Holy cow. Indy, you weren't lying when you said it was.
Yeah. Well, and one more question for Robert, easy one, but what percentage of the audits that you do you find errors?
Oh, almost every one of them. I mean, yeah, I would say it's probably about 98%. And that's even for big, large corporations. I mean, you got to think, if a company that's doing, I mean, literally hundreds of millions of dollars a year in processing is still letting $5, $6, $7 million slip out the back door, they've got a lot of people on their team. They can afford the best money can buy, right? But the problem, even if they hire somebody who used to be in this industry, right, and now has worked for them for 10 years, they're outdated because the game is constantly changing, right? So it's impossible for anybody to really stay current, to stay on top of it. We kind of hijack the industry because we allow people to bid, meaning if we do an audit, somebody can bid on it to try to win it. If the other company doesn't want to negotiate, we got to find them a new home. And for the right to bid, they have to keep us current. So it's kind of a nice thing because the processors, in order to get a seat at the table to bid, will keep us current on all the different things that's going on. So that's how we stay current, where a merchant on themselves could never do that.